Excellent. Looking forward to it. Thanks very much, my friend. Much appreciated. And thanks to you at home for joining us here tonight. Really happy to have you here. So this is Jasper County, Indiana. It's a mostly rural county in northwest Indiana. Closest big city is Chicago, but Chicago is like 80, 90 miles away. Yesterday, around 4 in the afternoon in Jasper County, Indiana, a sheriff's deputy pulled over a car in a traffic stop. And we don't know what the traffic stop was for. And we don't know yet exactly what happened during that traffic stop. But something happened during the traffic stop that made the sheriff's deputy decide that the man he pulled over is someone who he should arrest. Now, the man who was pulled over by the sheriff's deputy, according to police, he had a gun with him at the time he was pulled over. And again, according to police, when that sheriff's deputy decided that he was going to arrest that man, there was then an altercation of some kind. There was a fight of some kind. And the sheriff's deputy ended up shooting that man and killing him. Now, the sheriff's deputy is on leave while the incident is under investigation. There's a lot that we don't know. For example, the police are saying the man who was shot was armed, that he had a gun with him when he was pulled over. We don't know if that's relevant to the altercation. We don't know if the sheriff's deputy knew there was a gun. We don't know if the guy pulled the gun on the officer. We don't yet know the details of what happened. But we do know that the man who was pulled over is dead now. Police say he resisted arrest. The sheriff's deputy ended up shooting him as he was resisting arrest, per the police's description of the event. We also know that that man who got shot in that traffic arrest yesterday in Indiana, just last week, he was pardoned by Donald Trump for his crimes on January 6th. The man had apparently traveled to Washington for the January 6th event with his uncle. His uncle got 2.5 years in prison for assaulting law enforcement with a dangerous weapon. He was seen with an upside-down flagpole, appearing to hit an officer with it. His nephew, the man who was killed yesterday when that sheriff's deputy tried to arrest him at a traffic stop, the man's nephew ended up serving 6 months for what he did on January 6th. He got out of jail in July. He was then on supervised release until last week, when his conviction and all the terms of his release were wiped off the slate by an unconditional pardon from Donald Trump. So there's a lot to cover right now in the news. Honestly, it's impossible to cover it all at once. You kind of need a strategy, right? You have to notice everything, but you can only, there's only so much bandwidth. Today, for example, we got news that the big showy mass arrests that the Trump administration is showing off because they want to say that immigrants are criminals, and so they're rounding up all the immigrants who have committed these terrible crimes. We have news today that even the Trump administration is having to admit that about half the people they arrested yesterday haven't committed any crimes at all, but they arrested them anyway. Right, they've made this big show out of saying they'd be prioritizing, focusing on immigrants who've committed crimes. Turns out that is not at all what they are doing. They are just arresting immigrants. We also have news today that while the Trump administration is insisting on using military aircraft to fly immigrants out of the country, that appears to be purely for the drama of it, purely for aesthetics, purely for the photo op value that they think they're getting out of it, of putting these people, again, about half of whom have not committed any crime, putting them onto military planes as if this is some sort of war operation. A military aircraft moving one plane full of people that way costs us, the taxpayers, about $800,000. If they instead shipped the same number of people home the way the government used to do it before last week, that would cost about $100,000. So per flight, they're wasting about $700,000 per flight, $700,000 of taxpayer money, just to show off how cool it is that they're using the military, right? Great use of tax dollars, right? Efficiency, real respect for the military. We've got the mass firings of inspectors general at more than a dozen government agencies. Mass firings done in a way that is just flat out illegal. But they are doing it anyway, banking on who's going to stop them. After Trump totally caved to China on day one of his administration and said he wouldn't enforce the law on TikTok, which is a big favor to China. And after Trump funder Elon Musk got Republicans in Congress to change the government funding bill during the transition, specifically so he could build his huge AI plant in China using Chinese workers instead of having to build it in the US. Yeah, after all that toughness on China, today, surprise, the NASDAQ tanked and the leading US computer chip maker lost $600 billion in market capitalization in a single day, all thanks to new news about the Chinese AI industry cleaning our clock. But yeah, tell me more about tough on China. The Trump administration is sending transgender women to men's prisons. Trump administration is firing transgender service members. Trump administration is ending the basic anti-discrimination rules in federal agencies to make it okay to discriminate on the basis of race or religion or whatever else. They've today attempted to fire the whole team that worked on the January 6th federal case under special counsel Jack Smith, even though many of those people can't be fired the way they're trying to do it because of civil service protections. They're trying to do it anyway. Today, they've ordered at the Justice Department an investigation into the charging decisions that were made by prosecutors handling all the January 6th cases, which is presumably their precursor to trying to say it was some kind of crime in and of itself for federal prosecutors to prosecute people for the crimes they committed in the Capitol attack, the people who Trump just freed. Today, they moved the most senior career people in the whole Justice Department out of their jobs. Today, they ordered dozens of the most senior staff at USAID to go on leave immediately. Today, they started the process, apparently, of gutting FDIC. Really? FDIC is like the golden retriever puppy of US government programs. Who's against FDIC? I mean, I might love the Weather Service. I do. You might love the post office. Many people do. Somebody else might love the Library of Congress. Who doesn't? But honestly, who doesn't like FDIC? What's FDIC? Very simply, FDIC is the thing that ensures that when you deposit money in a US bank, you won't lose that money. It's nice, right? Bank deposits are insured by FDIC. It's been true for like, what, a century? Now the Trump administration is apparently coming after that too. Because what totally non-controversial, effective thing in the US government do they not want to blow up, and immediately? So, like, this is one day at a time, right? This is just one day. There's a lot to cover. But let's just focus for a second, because we can, because we're capable of it. Let's just focus for a second on what's coming up this week. This week on Wednesday, we're going to get, for example, a confirmation hearing for Howard Lutnick to be Commerce Secretary of the United States. Howard Lutnick is not a well-known public figure. He's Donald Trump's friend, and he is trying to become Commerce Secretary while simultaneously serving as, effectively, the banker for a specific cryptocurrency, which recently moved its headquarters to El Salvador, and which has come under federal scrutiny for everything from allegedly financing terrorism, to evading Russian sanctions, to mass-scale money laundering, to international drug trafficking. He's the banker for that particular cryptocurrency while trying to become U.S. Commerce Secretary too. That's Wednesday. Howard Lutnick, Trump's friend for commerce. Wednesday is also the first of two confirmation hearings for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. at a time when we've got a weird new big tuberculosis outbreak in Kansas and a bird flu epidemic that isn't just birds. It's now crossed from birds into raccoons and bears and sea lions and cats. It's crossed into 900 herds of dairy cattle. And yet now, yes, it has started to infect humans, threatening a new pandemic. At a time when the Health and Human Services Secretary has a whole horror movie worth of incoming to deal with, it will be interesting to see how senators contend with Trump's choice for that job. Trump's choice for that job, a man who questions the polio vaccine, who says Wi-Fi causes leaky brain, that's his phrase, leaky brain, and who says COVID was specially engineered to spare the Jews. Because that's Wednesday. The following day, on Thursday, we'll have confirmation hearings for Tulsi Gabbard, who is widely viewed as the Trump nominee most likely to be rejected by the United States Senate or maybe not even make it to a vote. This is a perception, according to the New York Times today, that is reportedly shared by Trump himself. Now, we're going to be talking more about Tulsi Gabbard's nomination on tomorrow's show, if she doesn't get pulled from consideration between now and then, which is starting to seem possible. But do note that some of the late-breaking reporting on her, just from this past week, included the previously unreported fact that on one of her trips to Syria, one of her meetings in Syria, per the Washington Post, was with a Syrian cleric who had threatened to activate a network of suicide bombers inside the United States and Europe. That was one of the meetings she took in Syria, alongside her other meetings with the dictator of Syria. So again, more on Tulsi Gabbard's nomination to come. Usually when it comes to a Director of National Intelligence nomination and you hear the phrase, activate his network of suicide bombers, it's because it's something that the DNI is working on, not a person the DNI is having a friendly meeting with. Also on that same day, though, that we're going to get Tulsi Gabbard's confirmation hearing on Thursday, we're going to have the confirmation hearing for Trump's choice to be FBI director. Now, this is a job that should not be open because FBI directors have 10-year terms. FBI Director Chris Wray has 3 years left in his 10-year term, but he inexplicably decided to resign before his term was up, which had purely and only the effect of making it easier for Trump to install someone new in the job. That was nice of him. But now, thanks to Chris Wray, here we are. As January 6th pardon recipients start to get arrested for other crimes after Trump pardoned them, as one January 6th pardon recipient was killed in an altercation with police at a traffic stop yesterday in Indiana. As the Justice Department today starts to investigate its own prosecutors for having had the temerity to bring charges against January 6th rioters in the first place. Let's just take this one day at a time. Let's just take a second to reflect on who Trump is trying this week to install as head of the FBI, as head of the 38,000 men and women of the nation's premier federal law enforcement agency with all of its immense power and responsibility.
We will go out and find the conspirators, not just in government, but in the media. Yes, we're going to come after the people in the media who lied about American citizens, who helped Joe Biden rig presidential elections. We're going to come after you. Whether it's criminally or civilly, we'll figure that out. But yeah, we're putting you all on notice.
That is Kash Patel, Donald Trump's pick to run the FBI, describing his plans for the second Trump administration. That was in an interview in 2023. You might have heard about that quote. You might have heard that quote. You might have also heard him describing his plans for the FBI's headquarters building in Washington, D.C.
I'd shut down the FBI Hoover building on day one and reopening it the next day as a museum of the deep state.
Well, hey, at least he is pro-museum. So, those are two of the relatively recent statements by Kash Patel that I think have captured people's imagination, that have received a lot of traffic since Trump shockingly named him as his choice to run the FBI. But there's been such a fire hose of news and stuff to keep up with all of these radical nominees. This 1 week thus far of really radical action by the new president and his appointees. I mean, there's been so much that, some of the truly wildly inappropriate or unqualified or at least controversial nominees like Doug Burgum at the Interior Department or Kristi Noem at Homeland Security or even John Ratcliffe at CIA, I mean, they've just been sliding through without much attention, even though they deserve attention. But, people only have so much bandwidth, right? It's understandable. It's regrettable. It's lamentable. But it's understandable. That said, For the FBI specifically, given what Trump is already doing with law enforcement and the Justice Department and the pardons of all the people from January 6th, this is just one that I feel like we can't afford to let melt into the sauce, right? Let's just look at a few other things about Kash Patel ahead of his confirmation hearings this week. Here's one thing. This is not actually the first time Donald Trump has tried to install Kash Patel in a high-ranking position in the FBI. In the final months of Trump's first term, you might remember that Trump reportedly tried to make Kash Patel FBI deputy director. That effort did not go well. Trump's attorney general at the time, Bill Barr, says he told the White House Kash Patel would be made FBI deputy director, quote, over my dead body. Bill Barr wrote in his memoir, quote, Patel had virtually no experience that would qualify him to serve at the highest level of the world's preeminent law enforcement agency. The very idea of moving Kash Patel into a role like this showed a shocking detachment from reality. And that was when Trump wanted him as the number 2 guy in the FBI, let alone the director. But okay, that's just one senior Trump administration official. Bill Barr doesn't have that much credibility with any group of Americans at this point in our political moment in America. Set aside Bill Barr. What about other Trump appointees who worked with Kash Patel? Well, Trump's deputy national security advisor, who worked closely with Kash Patel, he had this to say, quote, he's absolutely unqualified for FBI director. He is untrustworthy. It is an absolute disgrace to American citizens to even consider an individual of this nature. That's Trump's deputy national security advisor. And this, he's untrustworthy. This is kind of a theme in descriptions of Kash Patel from people specifically who worked with him in the first Trump term. Several former Trump officials say that Kash Patel had a tendency to embellish, to mislead. I think the word you're looking for here is lie about important stuff. John Bolton, who you just saw on this evening with Jen Psaki here on MSNBC, he was Trump's national security advisor, so therefore effectively Kash Patel's boss when he was at the National Security Council. He described him tonight on MSNBC with Jen Psaki as a, quote, climbing weed. He says Kash Patel falsely claimed to have been in charge of a whole directorate at the National Security Council when he was not. Bolton wrote in his book, quote, his puffery was characteristic of the resume inflation we had detected when Trump pressed him on us. We found he had also exaggerated his role in cases he worked on as a Justice Department lawyer. Given the sensitivity of the National Security Council's responsibilities, problems of credibility or reliability would ordinarily disqualify any job applicant. We found he had exaggerated his role in cases he worked on as a Justice Department lawyer. Well, and I said he said that in that book. That was actually in an op-ed specifically opposing Kash Patel for this FBI job. He exaggerated his role in cases he worked on as a Justice Department lawyer, as well as exaggerating his position in the National Security Council. What did he exaggerate about his time as his time in the Justice Department? What was that?
I was the main justice lead prosecutor for Benghazi.
No kidding.
Actually, yes, kidding. Hopefully he was kidding, because it's definitely not true. New York Times, quote, Mr. Patel has repeatedly claimed that he was the lead prosecutor in the government's pursuit of the perpetrators of the 2012 attack on a U.S. diplomatic compound in Benghazi, Libya, which killed 4 Americans. In reality, quote, he had no role on the Benghazi trial team. The pretrial investigation was handled by a team led by the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington. In his capacity as a junior prosecutor, Mr. Patel routed arrest warrants and the like up the chain for approval. Quote, Mr. Patel took a junior position in the counterterrorism section in late January 2014, well after the Benghazi investigation started. He left the department in April 2017, about 6 months before the first Benghazi case went to trial. What was it that he said? He said, I was the main justice lead prosecutor for Benghazi. Asked by Mother Jones magazine about Kash Patel's claims to have led the Benghazi prosecution's efforts in D.C., a former FBI special agent who was on that investigation for years responded, quote, oh my God, comma, no. Oh my God, no. Despite that, because sure, why not, a Trump transition spokesman recently insisted that Kash Patel was, in fact, assigned as the lead Benghazi prosecutor. Because that's their line, and they're sticking to it. Here's another one. A longtime Trump advisor tells The Atlantic magazine that, quote, he had been in Patel's presence more than once when Patel claimed he was the person who, quote, gave the order for U.S. forces to move in and kill the ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in 2019. This despite the fact that the Baghdadi killing was, quote, an operation for which Patel, by his own admission, wasn't even in the Situation Room. Asked about this, Patel said through his spokesperson, Trump made that brave and courageous call. Yes, but what about the reports that you repeatedly claimed that you were the one who made the call, that you, quote, gave the order? What about that? On the issue of January 6th specifically, as the Justice Department today is trying to fire all the prosecutors involved in the federal January 6th case against Trump, as they are opening an internal investigation into the prosecutors who brought cases against the rioters at the Capitol. Have you ever heard what Kash Patel says himself about January 6th? About what that was? Well, first of all, I should tell you that Kash Patel is credited officially as the producer of the January 6th anthem, the rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner sung by a group of imprisoned January 6th defendants, overlaid with Donald Trump reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. He's the producer of that hot track. This is who Trump wants to be put in charge of the FBI. Kash Patel says it was the FBI that was behind January 6th in the first place.
What you need to show is whether or not the FBI and government agents were using undercover operatives and informants on the day of January 6th. So once you prove that, then you defeat the insurrection narrative with the FBI's own documentation. Forget what the videotape showed.
I started smirking and rolling my eyes, and what I meant to convey with that is, come on, we know they were involved.
No, look, I totally agree.
Though.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I know definitively. It looks like you have a preponderance of evidence suggesting there may have been federal law enforcement involved in making that thing happen.
I'll get you beyond a reasonable doubt.
Federal law enforcement involved in making that thing happen. No. I'll get you beyond a reasonable doubt. Meaning, we'll criminally prosecute them for it, presumably, right? That is Kash Patel on a podcast, by the way, that according to a recent Justice Department indictment, was secretly funded by Russian state media as part of a Kremlin influence operation. Neat. The host of that podcast has said if those allegations are true, he was deceived about the funding. But there he is with Kash Patel. The host says, hey, we know the FBI was involved in January 6th. Kash Patel says, I totally agree. The FBI helped make January 6th happen. I'll get you beyond a reasonable doubt. Now he's Trump's choice to lead the FBI. Now, Kash Patel also had his own podcast on which he repeatedly suggested the FBI was involved in planning January 6th and has been engaged in trying to cover it up ever since. His own podcast was called Kash's Corner. It was a production of something called the Epoch Times. EPOCH, Epoch Times. From 2021 to 2023, Kash Patel appeared on other Epoch Times shows as well, on its TV network, in its documentaries. And the Epoch Times is sort of hard to boil down to its essence. Suffice to say that when your uncle at Thanksgiving started talking about a world government plot to cull the human population and to force the straggling survivors to eat bugs, it is likely he got that from the Epoch Times. But given that the Epoch Times, until quite recently, had Kash Patel on their payroll, consider this about the financing of this outlet. This is from NBC News' Brandy Zadrosny. Quote, after years of struggling, the once fringe newspaper powered by Falun Gong, a religious group persecuted in China, had finally found a foothold in conservative media. The Epoch Times had spent a small fortune on pro-Trump ads in the run-up to the 2020 election. They were amassing a windfall in the wake of Trump's loss, increasing revenue by a staggering 685% over 2 years. why did their revenue go up more than 600% over 2 years? The company said it was making money through subscriptions and donations, but these are claims that federal prosecutors now say were false. In 2024, the U.S. Justice Department alleged a giant multi-million-dollar money laundering scheme was underway at the Epoch Times, perpetrated by one of its executives. And honestly, calling it a money laundering scheme vastly undersells what was allegedly going on at the Epoch Times, according to this indictment. The Epoch Times' chief financial officer, quote, managed the outlet's Make Money Online team. The Make Money Online team carried out the scheme to buy crime proceeds and transfer them to bank accounts linked to the Epoch Times. From 2020 to 2024, the team allegedly used a crypto platform to buy tens of millions of dollars in crime proceeds in exchange for cryptocurrency. The crime proceeds came from sources including fraudulently obtained unemployment insurance benefits. Prosecutors alleged those funds were then loaded onto tens of thousands of prepaid debit cards. After purchasing the crime proceeds, participants allegedly used stolen personally identifiable information to open various types of accounts and transfer the proceeds into bank accounts linked with the Epoch Times and related entities. Quote, to hide the illegal nature of the proceeds, the CFO and his co-conspirators allegedly lied to banks and other entities about their sources, telling them basically that the Epoch Times was just raking in the dough in subscriptions and donations thanks to all their pro-Trump content. In the wake of this federal money laundering indictment, the Epoch Times CFO has pled not guilty. The Epoch Times has said it will cooperate with the investigation. There's no evidence that Kash Patel himself knew about this alleged scheme or was involved in any money laundering scheme. But in a bit of exquisite understatement, Brandy Zadrozny at NBC News writes this, quote, it is unclear how having a former Epoch Times content creator as director of the FBI might affect any investigation of this matter going forward. Yeah, you think? Because if Donald Trump gets his way this week, this guy's confirmation hearing is Thursday. If Trump gets his way on this nomination specifically, the guy running the FBI will not just be someone who spent the better part of the last few years hosting a podcast accusing the FBI of secretly attacking the U.S. Capitol and then covering it up, but he has been hosting that podcast for a media outlet that is currently under federal investigation for running a massive money laundering operation from its executive suite. But there's one last thing to know about Trump's pick to lead the FBI. And that's next, along with former head of the Intelligence Committee, current member of the Judiciary Committee, who's going to hear from Kash Patel at those hearings this week. He's going to join us live here next. There's more to come. Stay with us.